1941, 135 divisions plunged deep into Russia on a 1,500-mile front that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Hitler expected a quick knockout blow within a matter of weeks.
It was my birthday, and Hitler had marched into Russia. My father and mother immediately realized that that signified the fact that we no longer could continue, because my father and mother and I were German citizens and on Alexander were American citizens, so that they would have been all right, but we would not have been all right, and we certainly didn't want to end up in Siberia.
The voice you just heard there belongs to Hildegarde Mahoney, who recounts her family's amazing story in her new book called Journey Interrupted, A Family Without a Country in a World at War. We are honored to have Hildegarde Mahoney here with us in the studio. It's great to meet you.
I'm delighted to meet you and to be here.
It's great to talk to you, and it's okay if I call you Hillie, right?
Of course, that's right.
You're also the chairman of the Harvard Mahoney Neuroscience Institute in Boston, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but I want to focus on the book first.
Okay.
Great read, great story. It's received a lot of praise from some pretty important people, including former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who says this about it: a heroic story of the love and strength of one family stranded in Japan just after Hitler made one of the worst mistakes of World War II, breaking his alliance with Stalin and invading the Soviet Union. During the uncertainty, deprivation, and repression, Hillie Mahoney, with the strength of love of her family, of two exceptional parents and two brothers, demonstrates that family solidarity and love can help you bear the worst life may present you. Brilliantly written, a book that reads like a novel. It tells a story of family values of great relevance to the challenges we face today, and that is true.
That is so true.
All right, so this book details so many events that history buffs will recognize. You lived through them personally, World War II, the 40s and 50s. Why are you telling this story now?
Well, it's amazing, because I hadn't thought of telling the story, except that my friends and a lot of people that I've met over the years, said to me, gosh, that is such an unusual story. It's a story that we haven't really heard about World War II. You should write a story. Well, after enough encouragement, I decided that I would interview my parents and my brothers and the few friends that came to America from Japan who lived through that period with us. And then, with more encouragement, I went to see David Brown, the producer of Jaws. He was a friend. And I said to him, David, you know, I've been so encouraged, but I'm not a writer, and I see this more as a movie, sort of like a Dr. Zhivago type, or Chariots of Fire, a small but, you know, tight movie. And he said, Hillie, it's a great story, I agree with you, but no screenwriter can write a screenplay out of your head, so you're going to have to write it down. So I said, but I'm not a writer. He said, just go ahead and write, you'll find your voice.
And I think you did, for sure. Now, we just showed a clip of the documentary that goes along with the book here. And it's striking. Your family, they couldn't go across the Atlantic because of the tensions with Germany.
Exactly.
You guys were going back to Germany. You had to go across the Pacific. 2 days after you land in Japan, Hitler invades Russia. Now, before that, though, you had an idyllic childhood in New York.
It was just beautiful. It was, my father had come to America in 1926 and went back to marry my mother in 1929. And brought her to Germany. He had fallen in love with Germany as a kid, and decided he was always going to live there. And so when his dream came true, he brought his girlfriend from Germany with him, and we started. And that was 1929. They arrived just at the height of the Depression. And but
after having lived through World War I and all the harrowing tales that went along with that.
Exactly.
So your family, with your two brothers, you arrive in Japan. Germany invades Russia. As a child, could you feel the tension mounting very quickly?
Well, my parents were, in a way, very protective. They were agonizing because they couldn't go back. But my father immediately said, let's go back to America. But meanwhile, Roosevelt had put in embargoes on the Japanese because of what they were doing in Indochina and so on. And so there was no way to get back. And the Japanese kept saying, oh, come back in 2 or 3 weeks and we'll have something for you. But they didn't. By now it was September, and my father said, we've got to put these children to school. So we're in school, and one December 8th in Japan, we come home and they're sitting in the living room ashen. And so they told us what had happened, and that sealed our fate.
So your two brothers were American citizens because they were born here.
They were American citizens.
You and your parents were German citizens.
Yeah.
Obviously there is the alliance between the Germans and the Japanese, but your father wouldn't succumb to pressure to join the Nazi Party. So how did that make your life in Japan that much more difficult?
Well, for one, we were the Germans and the Japanese, not so till later on when the war escalated, but the Germans were considered my father politically unreliable because he wasn't joining the Nazi Party and he wasn't putting us in German schools. And so we had we were watched. But also, when the wars, when after Pearl Harbor, there were police stations along the bluff where we lived, and the amas, our Japanese amas, they had to report exactly what we were doing. Now, I don't know whether that's because the Japanese wanted it or the Germans wanted it, but we didn't ask questions.
We here in America have heard stories about the Japanese being interned during World War II. In this country, Japanese Americans, rarely do you hear an account of a Westerner who was in Japan at this time. Of course, the war ends. You saw all the destruction. You saw what happened through the accounts of the atomic bombs being dropped. But something that really struck me about the story, when General MacArthur came to Japan.
Our hero.
After, your hero. But you also talked about how you and your brothers kind of became mascots of the American troops that were stationed there, and you would get to eat with them in the mess hall.
That was always a great treat because there was so little food.
You had gone through starvation diets, as you say, but your brother saw the GIs dump their extra food in the trash, and he wanted to pull out the hot dogs and sausages.
The things that could be recooked with hot water could be recooked.
Do you ever forget as a child what it's like to deal with food and not knowing where your next meal may come from, dealing with that kind of starvation?
Do I know it now?
Do you ever forget it? Does it ever leave you?
No, I don't forget it. And what's more, I am horrified to see the amount of food that we in America throw out. I mean, I have a strict rule in my house: unless it's bad, we're not throwing it out. It'll be rewarmed, or it can be used again.
You know,
sometimes it's even better the second day.
My grandmother, who lost her father at a young age, had to raise her brother and her sister through the Great Depression, and she was she had a very similar rule about food. Right. You either ate it, or you got to make something else out of it for leftovers the next day.
You never throw. And actually, we were taught it was a sin to throw food out, and I think that's true.
That's true, and it's something that a lot of us take for granted today.
Exactly.
You know, I want to mention the book one more time. We're going to take a brief commercial break because I want to continue. There's so much more to get to. If you could put the book back up on the screen one more time. It's called Journey Interrupted. It's available now. I highly recommend it. We're just getting started. We talked about what it was like to live in Japan during and after World War II. When we come back, we're going to talk about how Mrs. Mahoney eventually made it to Germany and the family reunion that she had there, which was good, but there were still a lot of horrible things that she witnessed there as well. We're coming right back with more after this. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with Hillie Mahoney. Her book is called Journey Interrupted, A Family Without a Country in a World at War. So we were talking about Japan. You guys are finally able to leave Japan to get to Germany. This is after World War II, of course. Part 3 of the book is called Hello, Germany,
right.
Appropriately enough. I want to read a quote from the book here. When you arrived in Germany, quote, "None of us was prepared for the many scenes of complete destruction we passed. Just like post-war Japan, and last, we were shocked at the amount of rubble, twisted steel, and shattered glass we saw strewn along the way. It had become a wasteland." The Holocaust, and you learned about this from your grandparents.
Yes, that was horrendous. That was just horrendous. I couldn't believe that a country that bred people like Beethoven and Mozart and Nietzsche and Goethe and these great people could do such a thing.
But I want to lighten it up a little bit, because you talk a lot about your extended family, reconnecting with your extended family in Germany. And one of my favorite stories you talk about is your trips with your grandfather into the woods in the early morning.
Was a pleasure, a treasure. That's a treasured memory. I used to go early in the morning. We would get up, and he would come in his hunting clothes, and he'd bring his binoculars, thank you. And he'd bring them along, and then we'd go up to the stanchions where we could see the deer and their families go by, and then we'd sit very quietly and watch them. It was a great memory. I think the fact that my brothers and I have very little scars from this period is due to my mother's and the close family we were and remained with when we got back to Germany.
Just when you think the story can't get any more interesting, it does, especially when you guys make it back to the United States finally.
What a happy day that was.
Well, let's talk about that, because you just didn't make it back. You also, folks might recognize you from your work as a model.
Quite a while ago, John. It's last century stuff.
I will say, I mean, this is not just like a one-off kind of thing. You were the Rheingold beer girl, right? Which is equivalent to a Budweiser girl today.
I'd had a child, and I had dinner one night with friends of mine, with my then husband, and she said, "Why don't you come model?" Because I was working for $25 a week at Time Inc. And I said, "Model? I never thought of it." She said, "Yes, you can make $50 an hour." And I said, "That sounds like a pretty good deal." 25 a week versus 50 an hour. So I got an agent. And then no sooner did I have the agent, he suggested that I go to try out for Miss Rheingold, which was a 25-year contest. It started with Jinx Falkenberg in 1939 and went all the way up to 1965. So I went there, and they said, "Come back." I got a blue slip, pink slip. Somebody got a pink slip. They weren't supposed to come back. And then I kept getting the blue slip, and finally we were down to 12 people. And then they said, "You have to come back and tell us whether or not you're free to do this." Well, the next day we reported back and said yes. So they picked, I guess they had vetted us in the meantime, so they picked the 6 of us. And then we went on a 6-week campaign tour to California and up and down the eastern seaboard.
Was it fun?
Yes, it was great fun. It was just because, again, I was seeing a country that I'd only lived in New York in those early years, but then all of a sudden I was going to California, 29 Palms, I remember, and all across the Pacific coast and across the eastern seaboard. And so that was great fun. It was interesting.
I want to wrap up here talking about your work with the Mahoney Neuroscience Institute at Harvard University. Talk to us about the award that's issued in honor of your husband, and what are you guys hoping to accomplish there?
Well, we have for the last 20 years accomplished quite a bit, because we started it when George Herbert Walker Bush declared the 90s to be the decade of the brain. And so we, together with the dean of the Harvard Medical School, started the Harvard Mahoney Neuroscience Institute. And we did it because we wanted to support fellows who did research. We did it because we wanted to have give the Mahoney Award to those people or to that person that year has done the most for neuroscience.
What do you feel like is the most pressing issue when it comes to brain science today?
Well, I still think that Alzheimer's is but you see, there's stroke, there's manic depression, there's addiction. There's so many diseases of the brain out there, and it's that the researchers are doing the best they can to find cures for all these.
I know there's millions of people who appreciate that research is being done, because all those problems you mentioned, they're not going away anytime soon. The research needs to continue. It's a very important work, so I'm sure they appreciate that, and we appreciate you being with us. We want to mention the book one more time before we say goodbye. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Hillie. The book, Journey Interrupted, A Family Without a Country in a World at War. Very important, available now on Amazon.com. We here at Newsmax strongly encourage you to get a copy of it. You heard what Rudy Giuliani had to say. I can't think of anything nicer to say than that, other than I loved every moment of reading the book. Really an honor to speak with you today, Hillie.
John, it was just such a pleasure to be with you.
All right, we'll have to have you back soon.